Hey friends, so I had somebody ask me about why do you farm? I've had several people ask me that over the years, and so I saw some videos earlier today talking about guys giving kind of a testimony of why they farm. And so, not all of you probably know my whole background, but I was born and raised here and in Woods County, and went to college here and started a career in banking just immediately out of college, and uh, began farming. I was working the farm at a young age, and through high school and college, as time permitted, I worked on the farm in summers, all summer long. Worked on the farm, and then in earnest in 2000 purchased ground and uh, started farming on a lot bigger scale. And in the last 4 or 5 years, farming's turned into ranching for us, and that's our dog barking at I don't know what. Um, so, but I've been around it and done it my whole life. My dad did it, and my first memory of being on the farm was My dad did all of his tillage and farming, and I don't know how, because that had to have taken days and days and days and days to do things. But what was a Case 1070? That was my first tractor I remember. I remember with Dad, and I think I was in kindergarten or younger. But I remember I remember being absolutely destroyed that a half a day I was going to have to spend at school, that I couldn't spend it with Dad, and like that was a big deal. I also have memories of napping in that 1070. I've been in a 1070 recently, and how that happened, I have no idea. There's not much room in one of those, but Dad made me a pallet or a little blanket cushion deal in there. I think I remember taking a nap behind the seat, and I think I remember being on the floor of that cab of that 1070. I don't know how he and I were both in there, but wherever Dad was, I was, and I remember sitting on that seat next to him for hours and hours and hours, and apparently I would fall asleep because they had to make a place for me to sleep. So, but those are my first memories of farming. And then our grandparents ran cattle west of Alva, and my first memory there was I was sitting on the fender of an R John Deere tractor, and my grandfather was using cables or chains, I don't remember, but we were cutting trees and they were pulling them off into the canyons with that R John Deere. And as things was or were with my grandfather, he always seemed to get about 230% more out of a tractor or something than it was really ever designed to do or pull. But I remember sitting on the fender of that R John Deere, and it had a hand clutch, and I remember he would be pulling trees or pulling something off into those canyons way bigger than it was ever designed to pull. I remember that. I remember watching the fan. I'd sit on that fender and I could watch the fan up there on the radiator, and that old R would pop, 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 and that fan would almost come to a complete stop turning, and he'd pull back on that clutch and pop, 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 pop. That's my first memory of being out there, and my next memory is falling off that fender, going down through a canyon or something, and him grabbing me by the back of my shirt, setting me back up on the fender. So those are my first memories of being around farming and ranching, and then working cattle with my grandparents, and spending a lot of summers out there. I think my brother and I wore out 3 or 4 3-wheelers. Um, I remember there being a 90 and then a 185 and then a 210 and then a big reds. That's 4. back when they had 3-wheelers, and we'd run the wheels off those things out there. And so I remember my first, I would ride with whoever was cutting weed. I would ride in the combine, whether it was my dad, and pretty quick we had a hired hand, a family friend, Ed Stewart, a relative, and Dad we were running C2s, and one had a water cooler and one had refrigerated air conditioning. And Ed, for whatever reason, my dad owned them both, but Ed got to drive the one with their refrigerated air, so I was always sitting in Ed's combine as a kid. But pretty quick, I don't remember the age. I wish I did. I know it was somewhere around 10 years old. I was running the other C2 a little bit here and there, and then I think at 11 or 12 years old, that one was mine, and I just cut wheat all summer, every summer in that one. Then later we upgraded to an M and an L combines, and I remember running the L combine every summer, all summer. That was my machine. And then later going on up to an R, and we still run Gleaner R62 now. But I just remember those are my first memories and fond memories, and harvest was always a big thing for me. And preparing for harvest, doing the wrenching on the combines, I was good at it, and my dad was a good mechanic, and I learned from him, and then just kind of had a knack for it, and replacing bearings and running a torch and doing all the things you do to get a combine ready to go every year, changing oil and replacing chains and taking off sprockets and all that stuff. That just came firsthand to me. It was real easy, and I loved doing it. And then when I was in my teens, my dad took a job working for the Votech full time, and so I would drive down to the farm and work on combines in the afternoons, getting them ready to go. Or I always had some project going. I remember one project was I took some plows apart and painted them all up and put them back together, and did some things like that in the summer, getting ready for the summer. Do that in the spring, and those are just memories I've always had. It's just something I've always done. It's in my blood, and I wouldn't trade any of those memories for the world. Later in life, as you become an owner in the farm and you participate and buy equipment and go into debt and buy land and work with bankers, and all the stress comes. As a kid it was fun, and it's still fun, but now if you're farming and ranching and you don't owe the banker anything, then you either are secretly a drug lord or have some other revenue stream besides the farm. And I always did that. I had a banking career, and then more recently a technology company that I participate in, and I've always worked the farm and ranched and worked another job too to make ends meet. So those are just things that I've always done in farming. And so when someone asks me the question, why do you farm? I don't know. I don't know anything different, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's just something I do, and I can't imagine not doing it. So there's the answer to the question. Hey Brian, why do you farm?